Welcome to NIL for You. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a platform for athletes to network and connect with their fellow athletes and tap into a bunch of different types of resources. And this show, NIL for You, is all about education and having great people on the show. I'm always excited to have my co-host, Trent Clark. Trent, how you doing today, buddy?
Rob, I'm awesome, man. I love it. Always talking in this show and NIL for You. And this is a special day for me. As people know, I am the CEO of Leadershipity, serial entrepreneur, international speaker, author of Leading Winning Teams. Excited about that. And most people know me because I spent 13 years in professional baseball, coaching in 3 World Series. And today we're talking NIL, and I am a co-founder with David of Athletic Influencer Marketing. And we talk about NIL constantly, educating people on NIL. And man, this is a special episode because Dave is a close friend of mine, and he's also super agent. You know, he is the agent of Bullrush Sports and an NFL agent. And we're coming right off the draft here. And I see you got the 313 draft party in the back, David. Like, come on, man. Like the highest draft attended ever in history. You know, Detroit just did it right, David. First of all, hello to you. Tell them how they find us. And tell them how they find you, and then quickly give us a quick snapshot of how Detroit was for you.
Hey, thanks, Trent. Thanks, Rob, for having me on. You can find me on Instagram at bullrush.sports or _. I don't know. If you put up Bullrush Sports on Twitter and Instagram, you'll find me. I got about 40,000 on Instagram now, so we've done well. Yeah, we had a draft party in Detroit at the Caucus Club. That was about 2 blocks from where the draft theater was. And we had over 200 guests. We had a lot of great sponsors. And Detroit, I saw a meme, Detroit understood its assignment. I mean, they knocked it out of the park. They'd set an all-time attendance record for the draft at 775,000. And that's just in the arena where they're letting people in and counting. There was well over 1 million every day, probably, or really well over 1 million total visitors. But anyway, 775,000 official. That beat the previous record of 600,000 set by Nashville in 2019. And there were 34 million people watching the first round of the draft. And
it's crazy.
Talk about gateway work. Games have been bigger than any college football games this year, and how women's basketball is blowing out of the water. I mean, the NFL draft is blowing everything out of the water except maybe the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, David, I was over with an EO event in Detroit last fall, and man, they opened up the key to the city. The Illich family was there, the Penskes. I mean, well representing the superstars of that town. Man, I mean, some of the best meals I've had in a long time, and the accommodations were incredible. I felt, and I coached for the Detroit Tigers right back in the 90s, where it was like, leave the ballpark and run to your car, right? Like, it was a little timid and a little scary. And man, I felt awesome. And I'll tell you what I'd never seen, David. You'll appreciate this. I'd never seen a young woman under 35 years old walking by herself after dark in Detroit in my life. And I saw hundreds of them over that week. And I was just like, man, Detroit is turning things around. And now you talk about this, the draft, and it was national news. Everyone was talking about how Detroit is just bringing it home.
Well, yeah, I mean, Detroit really put its best foot forward. The city looked great. It was safe. It was fun. It was easy to navigate for the most part. The venues got full every night. People had a great time. Yeah, and there's that section of downtown Detroit all the way up to really Midtown, up the Woodward Corridor, and over to the now, the Michigan Central train depot that's getting redone. Detroit's a great place to visit. There is great food. There is great venues. There is great fun. There's great views of the river. It is a world-class city. And I think they proved it on the national and international stage, so good for them.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, let's talk about Bullrush Sports, man. I mean, we are here to talk about NIL. So, like, one of the things that came immediately out of the news was how the draft is being impacted from NIL and from the rules, from the regulations. Who's going into the draft? Who might choose not to because they're making pretty good money at college, and they might think, hey, there's no guarantee. I mean, David, you've seen this up close and personal with a great client list. It's not easy making it on an NFL roster and staying there. And there's some great accommodations and great quality play at the college level. Doubling that down with the education and finishing up that before taking that next step. What are you seeing from the NIL, and what do you think they mean by how NIL is impacting the draft?
I don't have the exact numbers, but I can come close. Several years ago, about 180 or so, or 150 plus players a year would declare as early as possible, which is 3 years out of high school, with up to 2 years of college eligibility remaining. This year, the numbers are more like in 75. They've been cut just about in half, or maybe it's uh, about half. About half the players are coming out early that used to just a few short years ago. And the reason is, again, it's hard to make an NFL roster. With the current collective bargaining agreement, there are caps and bans on what you can make as a rookie. Quite frankly, most people make the league minimum every year based on their years of service, and then where you are in the draft determines your signing bonus. So if you're a day two or day three guy, or a priority free agent, your signing bonus is that it's not life changing at all. The money is good, but if you can guaranteed stay in school a few more years and maybe make 100 or 200 or 300,000 a year, which some of these guys can, or more, for guys that are middling or very good FBS major college players, but maybe marginal or okay NFL prospects, it makes more financial sense for those types of guys to stay in school for another year or two than it does to come out to the NFL.
Yeah.
Who's guiding them? Is that something like where the agents or just the NIL people? Like, yeah, it's an interesting thing you just brought up there. I'm curious to see like how these athletes know whether to go or not to go.
Well, I mean, if you have an ethical agent, who's probably guiding you, telling you the truth, and that's what I would do. Some cynical people would say, well, an NFL agent is capped at 3% of salary by the collective bargaining agreement, whereas there are no limits on what an agent can take out of NIL commissions, if you will, at the college level. But I don't really think that's driving it. I think people are seeing, I can stay in college and make a guaranteed 2, 3, 400,000. I can take a shot at the NFL, which I may or may not make, and it'll always be there. I think now that we've got a few years on the water, a time on the water with NIL, people are just seeing that it might make more financial sense for your run-of-the-mill prospect to at least stay in school for another year or two.
Yeah, and I think that it also remains your popularity. I'm a big person on campus, at this college making over $250,000 in NIL. That is a significant, impactful person at a university, clearly, because people are willing to pay into that. They're having impact, they're having a voice, they're having recognition. So, man, you go to a practice squad and you're on the taxi group over with the New England Patriots. No one knows that you played at UCLA. No one even cares, until you're actually fantasy football worthy talking about, until you're, and I think fantasy's got to be driving some of these numbers, David, behind the draft and the attendance. What do you thought of that?
Well, in sports betting, the NFL just seems to do everything right, and they fall forward at every turn, and they monetize everything. They turn everything into a television program and social media content, and they're just expert at it. I'll mention on this topic, I was at a seminar put on by Inside the League at the Combine in Indianapolis. We were talking to a guy that had run the transfer portal for about 3 or 4 different major college football teams. And he was encouraging NFL certified agents to get more involved in the transfer portal in college football. And he said, take off your NFL evaluation hat, because the reality is there are guys that are going to get 6 figures a year to move up or move around in the transfer portal, who probably will never even get a serious NFL look. But that there's money to be made, and there's a need for good, honest and integrity, honest
Right.
representation. But reality, there's a lot of guys that are going to get paid 6 figures, and good 6 figures in the transfer portal, and they're probably not NFL players, but they're good major college players. So it makes sense. It pays to stay in school right now, unless you are the elite prospects, in my opinion. If you're a surefire day 1 or day 2, you probably ought to go. If you're maybe day 2, day 3 to priority free agent, you probably ought to stay for the full 5 years.
Yeah, and real quick, David, before and Rob, I go to your question next year, but David, your insider knowledge is extreme. Real quick, break down the rounds of day 1, day 2, day 3, because a lot of people don't understand. Day 1 is first round only. That's all it is, and then day 2, day 3 starts getting into multiple rounds.
Yeah, day 1, round 1. Day 2, rounds 2 and 3. Day 3, rounds 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then also the deals start getting made before the end of the day 3 about all the high priority free agents. And it occurred to me and with our clients, we essentially had deals wrapped up with teams before the draft was over. They said, we're not going to draft your guy, but we think he's got a draftable grade. If you make it to free agency, we'd like you to commit to this deal. And I had some competing offers, and in a couple of cases we chose and made commitments early. Last year, we opted not to do that on behalf of a player, and the player got drafted. Again, it really depends on the situation, but that's how it breaks out.
If they take that agreement, just so understanding real quick, if you set that agreement in place on, say, Saturday morning, day 2, day Friday's pomp and circumstance, day 1, first round, that's all the hoopla that everybody loves with the jerseys and the kids and everything. It's fun. But day 2, man, business is now in full force now, right? And you get a prospect and they go, hey, I'm ready to sign this and commit to this priority free agency deal. Are they immediately draft eligible if they sign, ineligible if they sign that?
Well, you don't sign it. It's just an agreement in principle. And if you get drafted, the deal's not binding. So
there you go. Okay. Got it.
But again, there's about 100 to 150 guys that are high quality players that for one reason or again, there are more draftable players than there are draft slots. There are more guys that get grades that are worthy of a draft. And that's why you have this frenzy to lock up this 100, 150 guys. It happens immediately after the draft. They get finalized because they're guys that were good enough to get drafted. And then you backfill with guys that are, not quite to that level, or guys who just get tryouts and mini camps. They don't actually have a contract, but they get invited in for a tryout and they can then get a contract for the so-called 90-person roster, that's the amount of players an NFL team goes into the preseason.
How many players are eligible? I mean, like in general, like just to put in perspective, like how few spots are available.
I don't have those numbers handy, but I mean, there are far more. Ian Brugler's the Beast in The Athletic is his draft guide. He profiles about 1,800 players. There's 256 players drafted last year, and each team's going to sign about 15 or 20 already free agents. So that's 30. That's what we're talking. We're talking about 800 slots tops.
Right. And 1,800 are evaluated. So literally 1,000 are not landing.
Than that are evaluated, really. But I mean, 1,800 are meaningful prospects. Maybe 2,000 are meaningful prospects every year. And about 800 will get drafted or signed on someone. And but then layer that on top of 100 and some FBS major college teams. Plus, we have a lot of FCS Division II guys who make the league every year too.
For sure. It's such an intriguing concept because you do see college players, and man, there's so many kids that are so good on Saturday, and it's a tough transition to make. And I mean, I think you just put that right in perspective, right? That 2,000 are fully evaluated, that they could make this jump to Sunday. Somebody believes they will make that jump to Sundays, and that only about 40% actually are going to make it. And that's after you've already excluded 2,000 out of how many players, right?
I mean, only 40% are going to either get drafted and or sign some level of contract, but
to get a chance.
Every team starts with 90 guys going into the season, and they have to cut it down to 53. So,
wow. So there's another almost 40% cut there. Wow.
Tough to make it in the NFL.
Man, this is why it's a warrior, man.
The NFL stands for not for long.
Yeah. Are there players from out of the country that are available for the draft? And they get looked at?
I got to tell you something. It's getting more common. It's interesting you said that. There's an international pathways program, and the Lions drafted an international player this year. They drafted, I think, the kid from England, and then there was a kid from Puerto Rico. Big linemen, big 6'7" linemen, 400-pound physical freaks. Or maybe the Lions drafted a guy from Canada. Actually,
he's British Columbia. He's like a Vancouver kid, or Calgary. No, Calgary wouldn't be British Columbia. I mean, British Columbia really surprised me. I'm trying to think about the football towns because no one's thinking football in Vancouver, Whistler, Vancouver Island, and this is a offensive lineman.
But if I'm not mistaken, though, it's a young man's of Polynesian descent, which you see on the West Coast, the Pacific Coast, and young men of Polynesian descent, really make the NFL in inordinate.
Yeah, the percentage is very high. I mean, and in the front lines are filled with Polynesian players.
Yeah, so like Jordan Mailata for the Eagles was an international player drafted from Australia in the 7th round by the Eagles, and he never played football. He only played rugby. It's getting more and more common, Rob. Especially,
Okay.
you've seen a lot of big linemen with rugby backgrounds who are very mobile getting drafted or picked up through this international program.
I had one other quick question that I thought about before when you were talking about kind of recommending NFL agents to, look at that whole NIL system. So at what point what's the typical, like an agent before NIL? They can only talk to the athlete when they're getting ready to go to the draft. Like, how did all that work?
Yeah, you can only sign, once you sign a player, a standard representation agreement with an NFL certified agent, you no longer have any college eligibility. But what's happening now is because of NIL, just because I'm NFL certified, I can sign a NIL or marketing contract with a college player, and I have and do and will continue to, or a transfer portal representation contract, and that will not affect their eligibility. With the idea being, and it's more and more common, we've got to get in earlier with these young men. In the case of football, represent them early on marketing or transfer portal or NIL, and then hopefully they become a draft club.
And I would imagine too, like even taking it down, 'cause I know, like, Trenton and you with AIM, even at the high school level, right? I mean, so technically, an NFL agent could look at, representing on the NIL perspective a high school athlete that they see a future of building that relationship, like you just mentioned.
I think it's happening with very elite prospects, and it'll start to filter down farther, in my opinion. But that's projecting way out.
Yeah.
And I like to develop relationships with high school families, though, of guys that are, I specialize in 2 areas really. I like to represent young men in terms of the football space who have a high school or Michigan tie, a high school or college tie to the state of Michigan, or maybe a Great Lakes state. And I like to represent people that play offensive or defensive line, tight end, defensive end, the front 7 positions. That's why I call it Bullrush. Again, focus on Michigan players with a Michigan background, either high school or college, and offensive and defensive linemen, because that's what I played and that's what I understand. I have a really good defensive back this year, but I don't know much about defensive backs play. I know he tested really well and he's a great young man, and I think he can make a roster, but I can't evaluate the talent. I can evaluate offensive and defensive line play much more naturally and easily than I can other positions.
I like that tie to Michigan. Let's just jump in let's jump in some of the headlines and go through some of these with David, because it's great to have some, such expertise and value in the market with us. So I definitely want to get David's input on some of these things that are happening, some hot things in the market for sure. And where you want to start, Rob? What's on your hot ticket?
We're gonna start here with bowl season director Nick Caparelli. In-house NIL collectives binding agreements could help to stop opt-out. So they're basically, what they're talking about is a lot of, and we were talking offline about this, like last year, the bowl game at Florida State, where a lot of these guys didn't play. And so, they're getting prepared for the NFL season, whatever it might be. But I guess in this, they shine that with the binding agreement that some of the NIL collectives have, hoping to circumvent those athletes, opting out and having to play the bowl game. So, the same situation that Florida State and Georgia had.
So for me, I mean, first of all, didn't know there was a bowl season director, so never heard of Nick Caparelli. And interesting, the things you learn every day. Like, there's a job for somebody everywhere, and he's the bowl season director.
As you know, I used to be a lobbyist, and it goes to prove my old adage: there's an association for everything.
Yeah, right. So there it is, and so I appreciate this as a fan, right? I appreciate that. Frustrating for Florida State, who felt like they got, a little bit jagged by not making the top four as a pretty good football team, and then don't really represent their team well in the bowl because of all the kids that did not play. And it's a challenge, man. I really appreciate this because, we all got school spirit. And I think I remember, David and I have a tie to Michigan State, and we've always rooted for them to do well. And man, I can remember when they made the top four, years ago and got smoked by Bama, right, in the semifinal. And, it's embarrassing. It's a good team, but man, you want to put your best foot forward, and some days you don't have it. And man, it's tough for the school. Those are tough days. There's a lot of vested financial and a lot of emotional energy in that. So I appreciate how they're trying to address it, but man, I see a lot of hurdles, Dave. What do you see?
I see a lot of wishful thinking from the director of the bowl season association, in my opinion, because I think the bowls are just now with the adoption of a 12 team playoff, I think the bowls are going to be even less relevant and in demand than they already are, but we'll see. But let's put that aside for a minute. I think there's two hurdles here. Number one, current NCAA regulations wouldn't allow this. Your NIL, the marginal NIL regulations we have, and we can talk about why that is, but are that, the NIL contract and compensation cannot be tied to an on-field performance or an on-field participation aspect. So what he's suggesting is an NCAA violation. Now, I think everybody knows that those regulations will be changed. That's number one. But number two, maybe the more significant longer term hurdle is that sounds like that's an employment contract or a condition of employment. So are college athletes going to be deemed employees or treated as employees? If they are, does Title IX apply? Are we going to have collective bargaining agreements? Is Congress going to grant an antitrust exemption to major college athletics? All interesting questions that would need to be answered for something like this bowl season mandatory participation requirement to be actually enforceable. But I think we're going in, these are the issues that need to be resolved, and we're going in that direction of resolving them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because as many people have looked at and gone, hey, listen, we can't have a pay to play system, and the portal feels like a pay to play because people are getting large agreements to go to a school and getting some sort of marketing contract. It cannot be tied to their performance, though it certainly looks like that on the outside in, which that's going to be an immediate foul on the NCAA. And it's funny that they just 180'd and say, hey, for the bowl season, we can have a binding agreement with the collectives that you got to play. So they did the exact same thing. They just flipped it 180 and said, now you'd have to play the bowl game and it'd be based on the performance.
They know which way the wind's blowing at the NCAA. Charlie Baker, the new head of the NCAA, he was a governor of Massachusetts. He's politically savvy. He's not part of the old guard NCAA. I think he should be given a chance to do his rather difficult job. But he knows which way the wind is blowing, and athletes are going to be one way, shape, or form, in my opinion, either employees subject to employment law, we can talk about that, or some kind of carved out independent contractor. But he knows that's the way it's going, period.
Yeah. All right, Rob, let's jump to the next one.
Yeah, the next one has to do with UA versus Alabama Birmingham, and they became the first Division I football program to sign with the Players Association Athletes Board. So, what's your thoughts on that, Trent?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. One is there's a pretty sizable group. There's a few, but there's really two sizable groups in the NIL space, right? Open Doors and Influencer. And athletes.org was started by one of the founders of Influencer. And Influencer has been in the game for a long time. They were all part of the sports media 7-8 years before NIL even became popular. So this guy has been in the game of this whole thing and watching it and progressing with it, which is really impressive. He also has a former Division I player, NFL athlete, that's also working with him on athletes.org that's developing this association. Now, he's a member of the NFLPA, Players Association, or now maybe Alumni Association, right, David? And so he knows exactly how some protections for the athletes make a lot of sense. So this athletes.org is now I think they were started last August, so they're coming up on, maybe 9 months now in the game. And it's going to be interesting because I think it's going to be tied directly into um, like what David was talking about employment agreements. What are they? How you get protections and things like that. So it's intriguing to me to find out why a whole team would decide to do that. I'm not sure I understand um, their motivations. Also interested. I don't know what is Dilfer. What do you know? What Trent Dilfer's
He's
tie
he's
is?
he's their coach at UAB.
Okay, very good. So he invited the whole campus, so all the athletes, not just the football players.
Uh, I think it was more of the football players, it looks like.
Yeah. Okay. But I think this athletes.org could really serve a lot of groups, and I see it. And David and I have talked a lot about the small colleges. Like, how do you get them educated? How do they learn about NIL? How do they create value? And I think some protections around an athletes.org and a central organization could be great. Could be a scenario where you run into too much power, like an NCAA one day too. So I don't know the answer. David, love to have your input on this.
Well, athletes.org, what are they? I think they are a union in waiting that does not want to call itself a union. That's what I think. They say they're an athletes empowerment advocacy organization. I just don't think they want to call themselves a union for a variety of reasons, but I think that's the rule they're trying to serve essentially as an organizing and advocacy force for the labor pool. Not that they can't do some good, and I'm sure that they will. But I think it's all, to me, under every NIL rock that you turn over are two issues that are interrelated. Athletes, college athletes, employees. If so, is there going to be collective bargaining or are we going to have an antitrust exemption? Because we're going to have one of the two. And I think it's inevitable that athletes are going to be deemed employees by a regulatory agency like the National Labor Relations Board or a court. It's just going to happen. Now we're going to have to confront this. Okay, we're going to have to collectively bargain, or we're going to have an antitrust exemption granted from Congress, which I view as unlikely right now. So I think we're going to have collective bargaining. We're going to have players organized into unions. That's what I believe.
You mentioned something interesting, like under every NIL deal, under every NIL rock. I question everybody's motivation under those rocks, David. I mean, that's the challenge I think right now in the market that's still pretty wide open. There are boundaries, and you and I have talked a lot about that. There's some decent boundaries in place. Man, I think people's intentions become a real challenge, and I think the NFL. We heard about it at the combine. You're wondering if people of integrity are going to stand up and really support these kids and be involved, because there's going to be plenty of people that are going to be there to take advantage of the situation.
Yeah, and then unions, no matter what you think, I mean, certainly do serve some important function in balancing the negotiating power and protecting the rights of the labor pool. I mean, it's been a free labor pool for over 100 years. I was a college athlete, Trent. You were a college athlete, and
So was Rob.
So was Rob, and it was an incredibly positive experience, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. But our free labor was also exploited. It just was. So that's not going to continue. And when I say NIL, I want to make an important distinction. Trent and Rob, there's what we do in terms of trying to educate young people about earned NIL. Athletes finally gained the rights that everybody else in the world had to monetize their name, image, and likeness, to monetize their right of publicity through social media channels or brand deals or commercials. There's that kind of earned NIL. And then what I'm really talking about is disguised salary NIL, compensation NIL. I mean, and that's where the real discussion you're hearing about NIL right now in a lot of these news articles is not about the earned brand deals, really. It's really about basically we're paying athletes a salary and we're disguising it and we're calling it NIL. And that's going to kind of be called what it really is at some point soon, is be more honest about it.
Yeah, I want to jump into a little bit of your history, David, because You're an NIL kind of expert because you're an 8-year veteran in this. You have a daughter who got involved with name, image, likeness at a very young age. A benefit to her having entrepreneurial parents, a father attorney. Like, this is pretty good positioning for her to actually launch a YouTube career. And I mean, she has a full fledged YouTube social media business. She is an influencer and making a significant company out of that in a full business.
Yeah, my daughter's Hannah Maloche. She started posting YouTube videos at age 13 or 14. Started getting interest and following, and then brands started to contact her. And it was mostly just free product, and then it turned into real money brand deals when she's about 14 or 15, and it's turned into a career for her. She's 23 now, and just to give you some perspective, she's been paid, mind you, to go to Coachella and Stagecoach this year. Free place to stay.
Yeah, I mean, this is
and paid to be there on top of the free stuff. Granted, so good for her. It's a real business, but to your point, I started having to review brand deals on her behalf when she was 14 years old, and I am a lawyer by training. And then we got professional representation to manage her career. But at first, it was like, because we wanted to be her parents. But at first, it's like, okay, I got to look, and I still look over things. It's like, yes, I'm a trained lawyer. I want to make sure that these contracts aren't outrageous and you're not signing away, again, your right of publicity in perpetuity, or for some crazy low figure. And that happens with athletes too.
yeah.
I'm talking about having to protect 13, 14, 15-year-old young people. You like to think when you get to 18, 19, 20, hopefully they've come up in this world and they've had experience. But yes, these are young people we're dealing with, and they're not full formed adults yet. I don't think 18 or 19 or 20-year-olds should be treated like children, but they're also not full fledged adults yet.
Yeah, and I think looking out like in a future crystal ball, you talk about her at really that 15, 16, now 23. I mean, she's 7 years minimum into paid agreements. And now let's take a guy like a Tom Brady, a LeBron James, who were both. I mean, LeBron was a well celebrated high school player in Cleveland area, down just south in Akron. I mean, if somebody locked this dude up, you talk about having his image in perpetuity. I mean, he's what, 41 and still in the NBA? I mean, it's crazy to think about that longevity, but he's a great example that there are going to be goats out there. There are going to be these athletes who have 15, 18-year careers that could start now in the NIL space. When David and I started at this business in the first year, which I think was 2021, there were what, David, 12, 13 states that allowed NIL activity at the high school level that made you college eligible. And I think we're now up around 38. And
we're pushing 40.
Yep, 40. I mean, 40 of the 52, of the 50 states. So you're talking about, man, like almost 80% now. So there's a matter here where this is going to play out. There is someone going to put in some deal to some kid that they signed, and you're going to be in a court case when this kid's 30, who's been an all-star already for 9 years, and someone's going, "Hey, man, I own you. Remember what you signed when you were 17?" And you're like, "Holy crap, man! Like, this is bonkers." So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I wonder if it's not a great education for the kids, man. Like, I hate to say it, but you probably need to be 24 years old to be a lawyer to get through the whole schooling, but you've got to play rookie lawyer. You got to bring people around you that got some experience and can look at some things that are definitely predatory in some of these agreements, and kids are unaware. And if they are unaware, they could get burned.
Yeah, and in schools, both at the high school level and the high school associations, and the schools at the college level, and the governing bodies like the NCAA or whatever's going to be next, because the NCAA probably is no longer going to govern major college football at some point, have got to provide the resources too, and tools and education and sample documents and registries of certified or at least somewhat vetted agents and representatives. Yeah, the adults have to be adults. The kids have to grow up, and it's a good experience for them. But the adults have to be adults, provide some supervision, some guidance, and some education and some protection, but not paternalistically and not like we have in the past. Johnny, you're an amateur and you want to preserve that, and we'll just take all this money over here. No, the money's got to be shared now, and it should be.
Yeah.
But again, the adults have to be adults.
Yeah, I think for the tips today, I mean, thinking about David's experience, I love this. There was a lot of years in professional sports where people were well misrepresented, and they saw that professional sports took a stand. Players associations, the NFL, the associations themselves, the actual MLB, everybody else, and they said, "Man, certification. Let's build a layer of credibility," and they did that. And that's not that long ago. Like, this is not 30 years ago when the league started. This is probably, a decade or two when, this has really come full fledged. And so I think there's a lot to learn there. So, as a person that's getting into this space, who you surround yourself with becomes very important. And it does not have to be crazy expensive. It does not. You have a chamber of commerce around you. You have a lot of things in your community that could guide you into meeting somebody in the right step. You should expect that from your school, from your association, from your university. You should look for resources that can be provided to help you along the way. There may be a cost. There may be something in there, but I think the very small cost up front for someone to do it the right way and find someone, a trusted person, will pay major dividends on the backside from one bad deal and we've talked about some of these horror stories, Rob, of NIL stories that come out and bad agreements where now people are on the line for the insurance of $100,000 car and all these things that have happened. And so to get yourself out of a very negative situation, some pre-work is absolutely necessary and ordained in this situation. And, you've got a great asset right here. David Gregory is available. David, tell them where they can find you again.
Well, again, I'm on Instagram at bullrush.sports, and then Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days at, I think, bullrush_sports. But when you Google Bullrush Sports, so you're pretty much going to find us. So that's where we live. Yeah, glad to provide whatever guidance, resources, advice, and we give a lot of, we're certainly willing to give an initial consultation to really any reasonable inquiry, and because I think that's our duty.
Awesome.
That's great. So, this episode of NIL for you can find us at sportepreneur.com. Our friends there have a bunch of great podcasts. Also, you just all across all these networks, but it's important. I mean, this landscape of NIL continues to change every day. All kinds of stories, and the biggest tip there with Trent said again, just make sure you understand the space and you have the right people surrounding.
Yes, thanks for everybody for joining us on the NIL for You show. And David Gregory, our special guest, man, just words of wisdom. Check him out. Find him everywhere. He said LinkedIn, obviously easy to get to him. And so, people, please reach out, find that advice along your way, and build a better future.
And any of you 6'8", overseas potential offensive linemen, find me. I'm looking for it.
Make sure you're from Michigan too.
Whatever. International. I'll branch out.
Connection. I had the Michigan connection. I thought I was going to get a second chance at the NFL. And they started talking about, some specs, and I was like, oh man, I may not be the mold.
They were all.
Well, but if they play offensive and defensive, that's the thing. If they play offensive and defensive line, they can be from anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. We got it. Well, take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Unlock the full potential with your business with Leadershipity. Our proven strategies have fueled growth for countless organizations. Ready to elevate your leadership and scale your success? Book your free 15-minute consultation now. Click the link in the show notes below and let's make your business soar.